Heinrich Boll, 18 stories. I will be reading My Uncle Fred. My Uncle Fred is the only person who made my memories of the years after 1945 bearable. He came home from the war one summer afternoon in nondescript clothes, wearing his sole possession, a tin can, on a string around his neck and supporting the trifling weight of a few cigarette butts, which he carefully saved in a little box. He embraced my mother, kissed my sister and me, mumbled something about bread, sleep, tobacco, and curled himself up on our family sofa, so that I remember him as being a man who was considerably longer than our sofa, a fact which obliged him either to keep his legs drawn up or let them simply hang over the end. Both alternatives moved him to rail bitterly against our grandparents' generation, to which we owed the acquisition of this valuable piece of furniture. He called these worthy people stuffy, constipated owls, despised their taste for the bilious pink of the upholstery, but let none of this stop him from indulging in frequent and prolonged sleep. I, for my part, was performing a thankless task in our blameless family. I was 14 at the time, and the sole contact for that memorable institution which we called the black market. My father had been killed in the war, my mother received a tiny pension, with the result that I had the almost daily job of peddling scraps of salvaged belongings, or swapping them for bread, coal, and tobacco. In those days, coal was the cause of considerable violation of property rights, which today we would have to bluntly call stealing. So most days saw me going out to steal or peddle, and my mother, though she realized the need for these disreputable doings, always had tears in her eyes as she watched me go off about my complicated affairs. It was my responsibility, for instance, to turn a pillow into bread, a Dresden cup into semolina, or 3 volumes of Gustav Freytag into 2 ounces of coffee, task to which I devoted myself with a certain amount of sporting enthusiasm, but not entirely without a sense of humiliation and fear. For values, which is what grown-ups called them at that time, had shifted substantially, and now and then I was exposed to the unfounded suspicion of dishonesty because the value of a peddled article did not correspond in the least to the one my mother thought appropriate. It was, I must say, no pleasant task to act as broker between 2 different worlds of values, worlds which since then seemed to have converged. Uncle Fred's arrival led us all to expect some stalwart masculine aid, but he began by disappointing us. From the very first day, I was seriously worried about his appetite. And when I made no bones about telling my mother this, she suggested I let him find his feet. It took almost 8 weeks for him to find his feet. Despite his abuse of the unsatisfactory sofa, he slept there without much trouble and spent the day dozing, or describing to us in a martyred voice what position he preferred to sleep in. I think his favorite position was that of a sprinter just before the start. He loved to lie on his back after lunch, his legs drawn up, voluptuously crumbling a large piece of bread into his mouth, and then roll himself a cigarette and sleep away the day till supper time. He was a very tall, pale man, and there was a circular scar on his chin which gave his face somewhat the look of a damaged marble statue. Although his appetite for food and sleep continued to worry me, I liked him very much. He was the only one with whom I could at least theorize about the black market without getting into an argument. He obviously knew all about the conflict between the 2 worlds of values. Although we urged him to talk to us about the war, he never did. He said it wasn't worth discussing. The only thing he would do sometimes was tell us about his induction, which seemed to have consisted chiefly of a person in uniform ordering Uncle Fred in a loud voice to urinate into a test tube, an order with which Uncle Fred was not immediately able to comply, the result being that his military career was doomed from the start. He maintained that the German Reich's keen interest in his urine had filled him with considerable distrust, a distrust which he found ominously confirmed during 6 years of war. He had been a bookkeeper before the war, and when the first 4 weeks on our sofa had gone by, my mother suggested, in her gentle sisterly way, that he make inquiries about his old firm. He warily passed this suggestion on to me, but all I could discover was a pile of rubble about 20 feet high, which I located in a ruined part of the city after an hour's laborious pilgrimage. Uncle Fred was much reassured by my news. He leaned back in his chair, rolled himself a cigarette, nodded triumphantly towards my mother, and asked her to get out his old things. In one corner of our bedroom there was a carefully nailed-down crate, which we opened with hammer and pliers, amid much speculation. What came out of it were 20 novels of medium size and mediocre quality, a gold pocket watch, dusty but undamaged, 2 pairs of suspenders, some notebooks, his Chamber of Commerce diploma, and a savings book showing a balance of 1,200 marks. The savings book was given to me to collect the money, as well as the rest of the stuff to be peddled, including the Chamber of Commerce diploma, although this found no takers, Uncle Fred's name being inscribed on it in black India ink. This meant for the next 4 weeks we were free from worry about bread, tobacco, and coal, which was a great relief to me, especially as all the schools had opened wide their doors again, and I was required to complete my education. To this day, long after my education has been completed, I have fond memories of the soups we used to get, mainly because we obtained these supplementary meals almost without a struggle, and they therefore lent a happy and contemporary note to the whole educational system. But the outstanding event during this period was the fact that Uncle Fred finally took the initiative a good 8 weeks after his safe return. One morning in late summer he rose from his sofa, shaved so meticulously that we became apprehensive, asked for some clean underwear, borrowed my bicycle, and disappeared. His return late that night was accompanied by a great deal of noise and a penetrating smell of wine. The smell of wine emanated from my uncle's mouth. The noise was traceable to 6 galvanized buckets, which he had tied together with some stout rope. Our confusion did not subside till we discovered he had decided to revive the flour trade in our ravaged town. My mother, full of suspicion toward the new world of values, scorned the idea, claiming that no one would want to buy flowers. But she was wrong. It was a memorable morning when we helped Uncle Fred to take the freshly filled buckets to the streetcar stop where he set himself up in business. And I still vividly remember the sight of those red and yellow tulips, the moist carnations, nor shall I ever forget how impressive he looked as he stood there in the midst of the gray figures and piles of rubble, and started calling out, "Flowers! Fresh flowers! No coupons required!" I don't have to describe how his business flourished. It was a meteoric success. In a matter of 4 weeks he owned 36 galvanized buckets, was the proprietor of 2 branches, and a month later he was paying taxes. The whole town wore a different air to me. Flower stalls appeared at one street corner after another. It was impossible to keep pace with the demand. More and more buckets were procured, booths were set up, and handcarts hastily thrown together. At any rate, we were kept supplied not only with fresh flowers, but with bread and coal, and I was able to retire from the brokerage business, a fact which helped greatly to improve my moral standards. For many, many years now, Uncle Fred has been a man of substance. His branches are still thriving, he owns a car, he looks on me as his heir, and I have been told to study commerce so I can look after the tax end of the business even before I enter on my inheritance. When I look at him today, a solid figure behind the wheel of his red automobile, I find it strange to recall that there was really a time in my life when his appetite caused me sleepless nights. My Uncle Fred, Heinrich Boll.